Hello, everyone. My name is Vladimir Onakoy, and today I want to talk about the Iraqi AK rifle, Tabuk, and my personal experience with those rifles in Iraq. If you watched my previous video, you know that recently I wrote a book about Yugoslavian, Serbian, and Iraqi guns, but unfortunately, modern technologies do not allow me to put videos on the pages of a printed book. So I decided to do a separate video just to use all of the excess photos and videos that I acquired over the years. A lot of people know that the factory that was producing Tabuk rifles was actually built by Yugoslavia. The history of Iraqi AK starts much earlier. When Abdul Karim Qasim came to power in Iraq, he was very friendly with the Soviet Union. And just like with other nations that were aligned with the Soviet Union, the Soviet government decided to give Iraq the technology to produce AK rifles. But there was one significant obstacle to this plan, Ba'ath Party. It was not aligned with the Soviet Union. It was trying to seize power in the country. At a certain point, they actually came up with an entire assassination plot to kill Abdul Karim Qasim. And a little known member of the party by the name of Saddam Hussein was tasked with making it happen. He failed, but Ba'ath came to power. And later, Saddam Hussein himself became the supreme leader of Iraq. Naturally, he didn't have a very good relation with the Soviet Union. They were not enemies, but it was certainly not the most reliable partner. Instead, they looked at Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia had an entirely different reputation in Iraq compared to the Soviet Union. I can talk about statistics that at a certain point, Iraq was buying 6 to 7% of all the exports of Yugoslavia, that Iraq was the main buyer of Yugoslavia's military equipment. All those numbers are in the book, but I'd like to share a story from my family because my mother, she was an Arabic translator and she spent a lot of time working in Yemen and Iraq. First time when she was visiting Iraq, sometime in 1986, I think. It was one of her first visits abroad as a young woman from the Soviet Union. She didn't get to travel much, so she wanted to go to the mosque because, you know, mosques are pretty. So when she tried to enter, an old man asked her, "Where are you from?" She said, "Soviet Union." And he said, "Go away. We don't want you here." She came back to talk to her friends, and they gave her an unexpected advice. Next time you hear this question, you say, Yugoslavia. She tried it and it worked. So she was able to enter the mosque. And it was not an incident. Yugoslavian engineers were not only building the military industrial complex, they were building dams, they were building bridges, they were building military bases that are still used by the US military. They built the bunkers that helped Saddam to survive bombings of 1991. So Yugoslavian-Iraqi relationship in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was truly special. That's why when Saddam Hussein decided that Iraq should produce its own small arms, Yugoslavia was a natural choice. That was the beginning of the classified project under the code name Cole 6. On June 21 of 1977, the director of Zastava factory formed a special working group that was tasked with preparing the technology transfer to Iraq. In charge of that project was Milan Ciric, essentially a father of the Yugoslavian AK, who was there when M64 prototypes were developed and when M70 production was just beginning. Very quickly, a Slovenian company designed new factory buildings, and then Zastava factory provided tools, machines, spare parts, and all the necessary materials. By the end of 1979, the first batch of rifles was assembled, and from that point on, production of Tabuk actually commenced. By the way, Tabuk is a name of an important battle in the Islamic history. Some people think that's the place where the guns were produced. No, Tabuk is in Saudi Arabia. So the first time I saw Tabuk rifle was actually in Afghanistan, in Kabul. To this day, I have no idea how an Iraqi rifle ended up in Afghanistan, but what really caught my attention were the markings. On the left side of the rear side post, there is a Lion of Babylon, the most recognizable marking of Tabuk rifle. So the Lion of Babylon is an actual statue, one of the oldest artifacts from thousands of years ago. And I would say that probably looks a little better on the markings compared to the actual statue. There is another famous depiction of Lion of Babylon, and it actually inspired the lion drawing on the cover of my book. In the beginning, the quality of Tabuk rifles was pretty good, and in fact, the factory produced three different variants: M70B, which has a reinforced receiver and a wooden stock; M70AB2, which has a reinforced receiver and folding stock; and M70AB1 that has a thinner receiver, 1 millimeter receiver. And for some reason, when I was taking pictures of Tabuk, it was always M70AB1 in my hands. I don't know why. So all three versions were produced at the same factory. And the only consistent problem I see with early Tabuks is the barrel. So when I was picking up those Tabuks, 5, 6 times out of 10, the barrel was just black. A few times I tried to clean it just to see the rifling, just to see what's going on. And after 20 or 30 patches, the barrel will still mainly black and you couldn't see anything. There were some exceptions, but unfortunately, lack of maintenance for decades is quite visible when you look in the barrel. And yes, without the chrome plating, it happens faster. But in Africa, I've seen East German AKs with chrome-plated barrels, and the barrels were in exactly the same condition because when there is no cleaning for decades, no amount of chrome plating in the bore can save the situation. As time went by, the situation in Iraq was changing. Sanctions, economic decline, obviously, Yugoslavian engineers going back home. So with later Tabuks, you see a lot of very interesting problems. First, the heat treatment of small parts, especially rear sights. So many rear sights were broken that I had an entire little bag of those broken rear sights that was carrying around. There were also plenty of problems with actual build quality. The first time I saw a rear sight that was installed upside down, I thought it was some kind of a joke that maybe a previous armor was playing on me. But it was happening so often that I tend to think that it was actually a factory defect because the quality control was so bad that they didn't care if the rear sight was installed upside down because I've seen it too many times. Other problems included, for example, gas tube retaining levers just falling out of the gun, never being properly flared. And again, all of this stuff, it went through the factory quality control, but the quality control just wasn't interested. At the time, if you worked at a military factory, it was the best way to avoid military service. And considering the fact that the Iran-Iraq war was going on for 8 years, you can imagine that a lot of people wanted to be at the military factory just to avoid the draft. And somewhere starting in the early 80s, you see guns with very significant quality problems. There was this one gun which I was trying to fix, and I took out the bolt, and like 30% of the locking lugs were missing. I was trying to replace it with another bolt, and I realized that no other bolt actually fits. So I think what happened is the guys at the factory realized that they screwed up when they were building the rifle, and they actually trimmed a big part of the bolt just to put it in and send it forward. So, the quality control, it seems, was just non-existent at times. So somewhere in the 80s, the Tabuk rifle was simplified. There was no more grenade sight, there was no more gas shot off. I was trying to determine when that simplification happened, and looking at the dozens or maybe hundreds of Tabuks that I've personally seen, I think it happened in 1989. But there are examples in the US of some parts kits that predate 1989 and they are already simplified. So at this point, I don't think anybody really knows the answer. Also, the simplification might have been happening gradually. Interestingly enough, in 1991, during Desert Storm, the factory was not bombed and it was working, but the quality kept declining. One of the best examples I've seen was this Tabuk from 2002, which had a very significant problem. It, I think, passed the initial inspection, but I always try to test guns with different magazines. And when you lock in the magazine, the wobble is so significant that the ball carrier cannot actually pick new rounds from the magazine. So you try to load your gun, and instead of round in the chamber, you have nothing just because the magazine is wobbling so much. So I guess you can hold it and to make sure that the feed angle is correct. But I think when you're getting shot at, you have other concerns than providing a right feed angle for your gun. There was one very unique Tabuk rifle. that I never saw. My good friend Miles Whining, who did extensive research on Iraqi weapons, actually saw it at some gun market. And then later, some Iraqi contributors actually explained to me in more detail how it was used. So it was a green Tabuk rifle, and it was used specifically for school ceremonies. So every day, children were raising the flag and singing their patriotic songs, and the teacher or children, there were different procedures in different places apparently. It had to fire in a very specific sequence using this green Tabuk rifle. So just another example of unusual things in Iraqi history. I was lucky to talk to a lot of Iraqis about their opinions on those guns. Not all of them were gun experts. Some just complained that the gun is too heavy when you're doing all the fire and maneuver, tactical training. There was this one gentleman who looked almost exactly like Sean Connery from Indiana Jones. He was very eloquent, very smart. He was a former dissident who had to leave Iraq at a certain point, and he said that in the good old times of prosperity before Saddam, Iraq was known for many things, but weapons were not one of those things. So that's a very good way to put it. Also, I met this wonderful gentleman who was working in security, and he spoke excellent English, very smart, a very hardworking guy, and he actually showed me how he loaded his AK in this extremely interesting, like fast way that I've never seen anywhere else. He was actually a designer himself. He, at a certain point in his life, designed his revolver that was piston driven. So we talked a lot about guns, and he confirmed what I was thinking, that you want to avoid the very early Tabuks when the factory was just figuring out how to make them, and the later ones when the factory didn't have the right quality control. So they're rusting relatively quickly. Also, a lot of people in Iraq think that the Tabuk and Zastava rifles are overheating very fast. And I would really love to go to Iraq and do a test and just compare it, because I don't think that's actually happening, but you can only prove or disprove it when you try it. So if you want to know more about Iraqi military industrial complex or Tabuk rifles, check out my book, From Balkans to Babylon, Zastava AKs of Yugoslavia, Serbia, and Iraq. And let me know in the comments what else would you like to hear, because I don't really do videos very often, but if I have time and opportunity, I like to go down the memory lane and dig through my photos and videos to find something interesting. Thank you for watching, and see you here on this channel.